thank you for joining. This webinar is called the Single Sign-On Surgery, Integrating ArcGIS with your institution's identity provider. Make sure I've clicked the right screen. So the agenda today, this is kind of loose. We've got a couple of presenters, and we're going to remind you of the upcoming changes to the licensing for ArcGIS. Going to introduce you to single sign-on and the benefits of single sign-on before dropping into a little surgery session, looking in more detail about how you can plan for that migration, things to think about your setup, your configuration, some troubleshooting, and looking at the really good help information, which is already there to support you. That's probably going to take no more than 20 minutes, depending on how much I prattle on for, which leaves us with half an hour to 40 minutes for questions. So the more questions that you put in, the better. So I'm Addy Pope, I'm the Higher Education Manager for Esri UK. I'm joined on the call today by Benny. He is my support. We've got a question. Is it being recorded? What's the question? Nicola's got her hand up. Nicola, we're coming on to a question in a minute, although I can unmute you, maybe. Or Jenny, can I unmute? I'll allow Mike.
Hi, Eddie. It's
Hi.
really just to say you mentioned to put questions in, but the chat is turned off.
I have got that on my very next slide, but thank you for pointing it out.
Thank you.
So I thought that might be it, but I thought I would check just in case there was something else. Okay, so yeah, we're joined by Benny, who is the other half of the higher education team, Damien Robinson, who is a technical architect in our technical support team. So he's going to be the expert doing the single sign-on part, the surgery. And also on the call, we've got Anna, who is our JISC account manager. And also our support from marketing, Jenny, who puts all of this together and sends out the emails with the support material at the end. So the next important thing is, how do you actually interact? Well, not quite there. Housekeeping. Most of us are working from home today in the Esri team. I don't have anything happening. They knocked the front of my house off door-wise yesterday, and it was really noisy. We've not got any interruptions, but I've said that before, and I've been photobombed by small children and postmen. But bear with us. Questions for today's session will be run through Slido, and Benny is going to drop the Slido code into the chat. So you just have to go to slido.com, slido.com, and put in the code Esri 3101. That will then give you access to Slido itself. It's a private chat within there with just everybody that's on the call, and you can upvote other people's questions. So if you've got a burning question and you see that somebody's just about nailed it with their question, upvote the questions. It's important to do that because Damien and I are going to take the questions in order of the number of upvotes they have. So if you think, well, that's a really good question, and you don't upvote it, it's not going to be one of the first ones that we answer. We'll go through them in rank order. Also, there's no such thing as a bad question. Consider this to be a very safe environment. If you don't know something, just ask. If you are too embarrassed to ask on the call, you can follow it up to myself afterwards, and I can then reach out to Damien. And we're actually going to show you like support methods. But if you've just got a question that you're just not quite confident to ask, honestly, this is a safe space, but you can also just email me later. That's the housekeeping done. So the reminder, why are we doing this? Well, we've got some big changes coming up in the next few months to the way that we license ArcGIS across the university landscape, higher education. Change number one is that ArcMap is disappearing as of the 1st of July and the 1st of August. Why am I getting that wrong? 1st of August. ArcMap will be no more. And also the ESU and EFL codes, which we have used to license both ArcMap and ArcGIS Pro, those are also disappearing on the 1st of August. So you won't have access to ArcMap, and for ArcGIS Pro, which will be the only desktop GIS from Esri that you have, you'll have to use named user licenses from August. And you will see those changes reflected in your My Esri accounts now. So that is the future landscape of licensing. And this webinar is really to look at why SSO might be the thing that you want to implement at your institution. So why would we want SSO? Well, it's a frictionless way to provision ArcGIS to your students and to your staff. By frictionless, I mean for them, for the user. Perhaps not for you initially, but it should reduce your workload if it's implemented correctly, because it will just work in the background, provisioning licenses to those that need it, when they need it. You just need to give them a bit of information about how to actually get in through the front door, but we'll come to that. The second advantage of that SSO environment is that it should promote a more secure system through the integration of our system with your main identity provider and all of the security protocols that you've already put in place with that. And it should be, by and large, a set up and forget system. There's a couple of things that you need to do if you want to be as safe as possible and as secure as possible. And Damien's going to cover those around certifications. And I've got a star almost, and we'll get to that in a second. But the main advantages are frictionless for the students and more secure for you. What won't SSO do? Well, it won't license ArcMap for a start, but remember, you don't need to license ArcMap because it's not going to be available beyond the 1st of August. And also, it doesn't magically delete users and their data when they leave the institution and no longer have access through the identity provider. Now, from a licensing point of view, that's great because it means nobody will get access because their access is truncated by the main identity provider. But it does mean that you get these orphaned users in ArcGIS Online and their data is sitting there. And there's something that we need to think about. I'm not going to go into that in this call. For those of you that have been on the steering groups, we've talked about it at length, and I am working on better solutions with the team in Redlands on that. When I have something to update you with, I will update you. So that's what SSO won't do. It's not a magic bullet for all of your problems. If we look at the landscape of who's doing what with SSO, I have this probably not colorblind safe bar chart of red and green. And what it's showing is the European Esri distributors, and the red is the number of non-SSO ArcGIS Online organizations, and the green is the number of SSO enabled ArcGIS Online organizations. Now, the good news is we are over here. I don't have my mouse highlighter on, but we're on the far right of that graph. And we have a good proportion of green, which means we have quite a lot of adoption of SSO already within our United Kingdom and Ireland. They're lumped together in this graph. And the other big user of ArcGIS Online in terms of numbers is Germany, which has a greater number of ArcGIS Online organizations through higher education, but a smaller percentage of SSO enabled. So we're sitting at something like 27% of all institutions now have SSO. And I got this information in November, and it was a huge surprise. Somebody in the education team in the States found a way to work out who has and who has not got SSO. It's very difficult for me to know unless you tell me. So we have over 30 that have implemented SSO and it is working. So there's a good body of evidence that it's not that difficult and you can get on with it. Because certainly I've only been contacted by maybe 5 or 6 institutions with to get more help. So 25 plus have done it by themselves off their own back. And of that, we know that there's only really one institution which has had more than a minor difficulty to get it set up. And I think Damien's going to talk in more detail about why that problem came around and how we managed to resolve that problem and the effort that it took. So the landscape is looking pretty good from my numbers, but it also gives me a bit of confidence that we're halfway down that road. Well, not halfway, we're about a quarter of the way down the road of SSO adoption. But the good news is it seems to be working at institutions across the UK and Ireland. So if you're thinking about setting up SSO and you're on the call, that's good. But what should you be thinking about? Well, it's kind of like a logical order. The first one in my mind is request a test AGOL node that you can experiment with. And you can make an absolute mess of it and it won't interrupt your day-to-day ArcGIS users using ArcGIS Online. And actually, when you're requesting that new node, it would be a pretty ideal moment to request an EU hosted node. Because of when we set up most of our ArcGIS Onlines back in 2014, 15-ish, they were all US hosted. We can now get an EU hosted ArcGIS Online node, but there's a bit of faff when you have to move users and content from one to the other. So if you're going to swap anyway to an SSO enabled node, you may as well use that opportunity, that window of opportunity to have an EU hosted node. But then you have to think about how to migrate content. We were speaking to a university this morning about that, and I've got lots of support material that I'll show you later on. And the last thing is I would certainly advocate making the SSO expert in your organization an authorized caller in Esri. And Damien is going to talk about, how you triage a support call to get to the right people. And it's going to go through Esri. So you may as well make that SSO person within your IT team an authorized caller within Esri, because then they don't have to ask you, and then you have to ask us, and then we send a message back to you and you send it back to them. That just delays the process, and often information gets lost as it gets passed one way and the other. So just make them an authorized caller, connect them directly to Esri, and they can raise support calls if they run into difficulties. So on the support material, we do have a lot of information which is available to you to support you on your journey from, towards an SSO solution. The Esri documentation is pretty damn good. Every time I go in there to answer one of my questions, I think, well, this is really good. Why don't I use it more? It's just that thing. I forget that it's there and I go into forums, but actually the base documentation is pretty damn good. Also, the SSO providers, such as Microsoft with their Entra, have some really good documentation. And Damien's going to go through this in a bit more detail. I am putting together a story map to support users with migration between AGOL organizations, because I realized that the information again is scattered somewhat and there's multiple solutions depending on what you want to do. So I'm going to bring that all together. I started on that this morning, but hopefully that will be ready for when you get the recording of this webinar and you'll be able to look at that. That migration story map will obviously be hosted and linked from the managing users section of Lecture with GIS. And if you haven't looked at that, we probably should. Let's slide this in here. This is where Benny's quite nervous because he published an update to this site this morning. So Lecture with GIS, which you can just put in lecturewithgis.co.uk and it should redirect, is kind of your one-stop shop for all of the information to support you to manage ArcGIS at your university. We have some top resources looking at modern GIS, reimagining GIS in higher education, and also a link to the previous webinar recordings that we've put together. But down here, you'll find the main support material, and you can just use the filters to get towards the information that is most important to you. So here I've decided that I'm looking at ArcGIS Online and managing users, and then I get this information and I can go into each one of those story maps and explore it in more detail. Really good resource. There's also documentation on some of the tools that will be mentioned in this migration story map. And there's also the Esri community. So here there's a page, how to transfer content into your next account. There's loads of good advice in there. And there's, when you read something really good and then you actually get down to the comments and you find that the real gold is in the comments, because people go, I've tried that, but it doesn't work in this situation. And somebody from Esri then answers the question and possibly links to a more relevant article. So don't just read the article, go down to the comments as well, and you'll find out there's an active community who have problems just like the problem that you have, and there's probably a solution which has already been documented to help you. It's a much quicker way to get to the answer than perhaps even raising a support call at times. It would definitely be on my list of things to do before I raise a support call, to go and dig into the Esri community and see what's there. My question has probably already been answered. So that is enough from me, and I'm going to pass over to Damien, who is going to take a deeper dive into some of the more technical stuff and some of the support material that is available. Damien, do
Thank
you
you,
want
Abby.
to? Okay,
So,
going to tell you when I can see your screen, and then I'm going to go on mute. I
and
can
you
see
my
your screen. Excellent.
Perfect.
I'll go on mute.
Okay, so thank you, obviously, Addy, for inviting me along here. For those who don't know me, I'm Damien Robinson. I'm a technical architect here in Esri UK's technical support. So what I do is I help run the support team effectively. I have a background in enterprise architecture, infrastructure management, and supporting our customers and working with their IT teams to configure SSO. So I've done a lot of these configurations, and I've observed some of the most common issues that come into support. So on the odd occasion, it could be the result of a bug, but other times it can be a configuration issue. As Addy's already mentioned there, we've already seen one, we've only ever really seen the one complex issue coming from the university sector. And in that case, it was using an OpenID Connect configuration. And after time troubleshooting logs with our colleagues who run ArcGIS Online. So what happened was, case was raised, the case then came through to our support team. Our support team that troubleshoot basically and work through all the various problem solving methods that we use. And ultimately then that required a further escalation to the ArcGIS Online team. And what we ultimately did was I jumped on a call with the customer, and we ran through the test, and I had agreed with the ArcGIS Online team that I would capture all the details that I needed to capture. So that would be the time, the dates, the timestamps, the steps that were taken. And I was then able to furnish the ArcGIS Online team with all that information. They were able to go through, and ultimately, after a bit of to and fro, we worked out that it was a configuration issue, and it had been a misconfigured parameter in the request that had come through and appeared in the logs for ArcGIS Online. So obviously that's not something that takes a short amount of time. That's quite an extended amount of time. And it's probably at this point then that I would like to highlight a term that we use, which is called going with the grain. So OpenID Connect is fully supported. Ultimately, by working with our support team, the ArcGIS Online team, we narrowed down the issue, but it's still quite niche and much less frequently implemented than something like SAML and Azure AD, which is now Entra ID. Hence, going with the grain in this case would be implementing the most popular workflow, which is SAML and Azure AD/Entra ID. I keep saying that because I haven't quite come to terms with calling it Entra ID myself, and I still refer to it often as Azure AD. So this be our recommendation for its ease of implementation and the quality of the documentation. So I had contemplated putting some slides together with an architecture diagram, but ultimately that simply would have been a picture of an app and a fluffy cloud that represented ArcGIS Online. So for me, it makes more sense to point out the best documentation to help you self-serve. So I use this documentation myself regularly when configuring SSO. So for anyone who hasn't seen, Microsoft provides some absolutely outstanding documentation around single sign-on. They provide you with single sign-on tutorials for any amount of products, and ArcGIS Online is no different. It's just another product that they effectively provide a tutorial for. So this tutorial is really, really good for the Microsoft side of things. It does go through the whole solution in incredible detail, and but I tend to use it for up to about here. So once we get to the configure ArcGIS Online SSO, that's where I switch across to the ArcGIS Online documentation, which is a lot more detailed and will give you a lot more detail on the parameters and everything that you need to configure effectively. One of the things that I would like to point out is the best practices for SAML security. In that section, it'll basically detail everything that you will need to configure to make this setup more secure. So this feeds on to Addy's point about leaving it and not having to do anything. When you do make this more secure, it does mean there is an annual maintenance activity that is required, and that is the refreshing of the ArcGIS Online SAML certificate. So every year this happens around August and September, and it's very well documented. The blogs are pushed out, and there's again, the documentation is incredible for this. It's so detailed and very simple to follow. So again, depending on how you've set up the security best practice will determine what exact steps you need to consider. But again, it's all incredibly well documented. That is, I would say, a good payoff for increased security. So yeah, I would say the final piece of documentation that I want to refer to is actually a YouTube video that was from a past Esri conference. And you'll actually notice the presenter was Gregory Ponto, and the owner of this blog is Gregory Ponto. So it's coming from the horse's mouth, effectively. Here we've got the people who are managing this, giving us the information direct. So yeah, we use this within Esri UK for passing on to customers whenever they are setting up SSO. We also use it ourselves whenever we are setting up SSO. So this is an incredible YouTube video that details the exact steps that you need to do as well. So that's something for people who potentially learn slightly differently. Maybe the documentation, one of the criticisms I would have is it's quite wordy. There's no screenshots. That's where the screenshots are good in the Microsoft documentation, but also the YouTube video is incredible for that as well. So yeah, that's pretty much everything that I've put together. Just to finish up, I suppose, to leave you with some key points. Our key phrase is go with the grain. So yeah, avoid adding complexity if you can. And technical support are obviously here to help you. And we have highly experienced analysts when it comes to SSO. So if you run into trouble, simply raise a case in my Esri, and hopefully we're here to help.
Excellent. So what I want to do now is not get distracted by Slido questions, but great to see loads of Slido questions coming in. I need to share my screen again, so let's just move that over there. And you should now be able to see stuff. Damien can give me the thumbs up if he can see it.
I can see it, yes.
Perfect. So yeah, so now I reckon we'll have a quick message from JISC from Anna. So just Anna's, have you unmuted yourself, Anna, or do you need me to do it?
I believe I've unmuted myself.
Okay, well, welcome to the call and good to see
Thank
you on
you.
this. You know, JISC do a lot of good work in messaging the community as well. And Anna's going to share this with you.
Okay, so this is just another channel alongside obviously the direct channels that Esri have just shared with respect to supporting the integration of single sign-on with ArcGIS and Esri products. So for those of you who aren't aware, there's a JISC mail list called the Academic Applications Forum, or the AAF, and it comprises mainly software licensing folk from across the higher education sector. And it's also monitored by members of the chess team at JISC, which is where the majority of your institutions will be getting their site license for the Esri products from. So alongside the mailing list, there's also a Teams space that's hosted at Sussex University. And we've recently made an ArcGIS single sign-on integration and management channel as part of that. So I think there's about 50 or 60 people who've currently got access to that Teams space. But Mark Wilson, who manages that, who's based at Sussex, has said that he was prepared to open that invite to the Teams space for any people who are kind of outside of licensing and maybe involved institutions directly with a single sign-on if you'd like to join. Really, it's just a space for people to share their experiences. So I think Addy said there's over 30 UK institutions who've already integrated single sign-on. So if people who are from those institutions could just maybe share a few paragraphs or some information about how that's gone from, if there's any problems. It's really just an additional resource so that if people want to chat within the higher education community, there is a place for them to do that. So I think these slides will be passed around after the webinar along with the recording, and I'll also put a link to this information up on the CHESS web pages as well for the agreement. Okay, thank you, Andy.
Thanks, Anna. What I'll do is I'll transcribe what you've got on the screen into the email, and that will go out once I get the recording and tidy it up and get the story map resource together. So thanks, Anna. That sounds like a really good resource, because actually, you know, speaking to other universities that have gone through the process and learning from them is the best way to learn, I find, and you should get confidence that they've got through it. Oh, I've got to click on the actual slide to make it move. So just to reiterate, the documentation that's available is wide-ranging and should support you, and it's off the Esri support page or Esri documentation, the SSO providers themselves, and then lecture with GIS, scaffolded with things like the Esri community. And if I take 2 seconds just to go into the Esri community, share my screen across. Yeah, so this is the how to transfer content from your next account. Gives you some good context, some links to the documentation and to some of the tools that you might want to use. There's no comments on this one, but you can then go in and start to explore other areas and find other things that might be useful. So there's an active body of people, both in Esri land and the distributors and customers, that provide information into the Esri community, and it's often overlooked. If you find an area that you quite like, that seems to speak to quite a lot of the issues that you have or the information that you'd like to get, you can subscribe to the page, and it's an easier way. So it's all there for you to make life easier. And I think that's going to be it. So I'm going to now go into the questions before that bit. So now this is where it gets difficult, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my Slido here and see what is top of the chart. So Damien, are you ready? Have you had a look?
I've had a brief look, yes, at some of them. So
can our existing site work alongside a new SSO site for a period before it is retired so as to ensure blah, blah, blah? Yeah, yes is the answer. What I would recommend is getting a new ArcGIS Online tenant and having that EU hosted, which I will request, and then experimenting, implementing, getting some friendly users just to hit it and go in and see what it looks like, tweak it. You know, you might want to be having groups, because actually something that we've not spoken about is within that single sign-on identity provider, there could be the notion of groups and lists, and you might want to use that to exclude estates and facilities from your main ArcGIS Online organization, and vice versa. So yes, you can have multiple SSO ArcGIS Onlines at any one time, and then when you've got them both, you need to look at how you get the content from the old one into the new one, and that story map that I am putting together over the end of this week will inform you of the best practice. Benny, who's on the call, has got a little bit of testing to do, because there's some options. There's a script that you can run. There's a tool in ArcGIS Pro, and we're just going to experiment and see how they work and then give you our findings. Damien, anything to add?
Nope, that's spot on.
Yeah. Okay, we'll go to the next one. So we'll say that was done. Mark as answered. Perfect. Does the product offer any good methods of synchronizing identities in AGOL?
Okay, so SCIM, as I call it, yes, that is under consideration currently as an enhancement. So that's currently not offered. So yes, under consideration means that it's currently being reviewed by the product team in order to determine can it be added to the product.
Damien, is there a way that we can look at the enhancements and upvote them. There used to be.
Yes, there is. You do that through Esri Community.
So Andy, if you think this is something that you would definitely want, we'll show you how to throw an extra like on that, because the dev team, they do look at the volume of people asking for an enhancement, and that's one of the things that orders it. So I can see Damien typing. So I'll move on to the next one, and we'll try and get that link into at least the chat, or
That's in the chat.
follow-up email. Perfect. So we'll do that one as, how much time would you suggest allowing to oversee the migration and for academic technical contact, and separately for the IT service SSO expert? So I think the whole process, I mean, from the new ArcGIS Online tenant arriving and you having access to it, I don't know, Damien, what's your experience?
I would say the SSO side of it is, so anyone who does IT administration does this day in, day out. It's bread and butter stuff for IT administrators. So the SSO setup will not take long. It'll be the migration of the content. It will depend on the amount of content you have, the amount of users, etc. There's any amount of variables really there.
I'm probably also getting a bit of support information out to your users, because when you go to ArcGIS Online, well, you know what? Let's do it. ArcGIS.com. If I go to ArcGIS and go to sign in, this will be where your users have been putting in their username and their password. But what they need to do in a SSO bright future is to hit this ArcGIS Online organization. And here you have to put in, can't type and talk, sorry, I'm a simple being. You have to put in your URL short name. So you could have a link which auto-populates this perhaps. Damien, is that possible? Is there best practice on how to get people in?
Yeah, I would need to look into that.
I mean, the key is you do it once and then you remember, and it'll take you there by default. But that's the way to get in. And then it does its magic, and I'll have to do two-stage authentication on my phone to get in. So you then click the blue button, which means it's validated that it's a correct access point. Actually, it has let me straight into my ArcGIS Online. So that is frictionless if they know where the front door is. But if they don't know where the front door is, then they're not going to get in, and it's going to be more friction. So I think the SSO bit is really easy. The migration and making sure that the documentation is there to support users will take you a bit more time. And we can support you with the best practice on both of those things. So hopefully that answers that one for the anonymous person. Are there charges for user data held in ArcGIS Online? Thinking about incentives to tidy up. Yes, there are. It's credits, but you get an absolute shed load of credits with your institutional agreement, and with unlimited users, technically you just request more users and you get more credits. But ethically, there's a responsibility for us to tidy up our ArcGIS Online organizations, because every bit of data is stored somewhere and we have to keep the lights on, which costs carbon. The other reason is GDPR and UK GDPR. You shouldn't be holding data longer than you need it, and a student or a staff member could have collected personal information in a survey or in a feature service, and you have to delete that once they've left after your data retention period. So say that's 24 months after they leave, you should delete it. So there is an incentive for us to clean up ArcGIS Online organizations periodically. And that's what I was alluding to in my previously, where I said I am working with the Esri Inc. team to get a more satisfactory methodology, which enables us in large organizations to manage that process of when a user has left and it's an SSO user, how do you find them automatically, move them, and then delete them after your data retention period has expired. I am working on that. Along with the German colleagues, we've got ideas. We're just trying to get people to listen at the moment. Okay, how should we request a trial? to test SSO, email myself or hireed@esriuk.com, and we will make that request for you. That will come out in the follow-up email as well. So a nice, easy one there. And then it takes up to about a week for Esri Inc. to get it. It's been a little bit slower than I would like of late, but usually we can push it through. We still add non-SSO users into our AGOL org. Yes. So if you've got SSO enabled, you use that as your primary route, but you could add somebody in who isn't SSO. Yeah. Anything else I've missed on that one, Damien?
Yes, it's just suppose highlighting that it is it's a multiple security model. So it's not fixed to one or the other. You can have both.
Yeah, and you can then put two-stage authentication on those non-SSO users. So in my organization that I manage, I got audited yesterday, which was a fun process by our data team, which I am part of as well. So I had to go through and justify all of my users. And because I use my account for training, I have 60 non-SSO users for training, and they don't have multi-factor authentication. Then I have a handful of people that aren't in Esri UK but have access, and they do have multi-factor authentication. So you could do, and actually that poses a question. If you don't want an EU hosted node, just set up SSO in your existing AGOL org, and then moving content within the org is easier than moving it between organizations. But honestly, a lot of you have asked for EU hosting nodes, and it's a pain in the bottom, so you may as well do it once, do it now as you're implementing SSO, but you don't need to. Is there a reminder sent out each year for the SAML certs? Yes, there is. And I think it goes to the person that's designated as the main admin in your ArcGIS Online organization, which is in the settings. So if you think that person should be you, then put your email address in, and then you can forward it on to the SSO people if that is more appropriate. If you think they'll miss it, then, but yes, we do send it out.
Yeah, and there's quite an extensive communications piece done by Esri Inc. around this as well. So hopefully you shouldn't miss it, but with all those notifications in place.
With the volume of emails that we all get, people do miss them, and we get a little spike in support calls, and it's quite an easy
Yes.
one because support just know that they're going to get on in August a spike, and they've got.
Yeah, we prepare for this, and we have the preparations in place to help people quickly with this. So
Yeah, best will in the world, we don't we don't notice 100% of our emails, do we? There's just so many of them. Well, that changed. Do we need to update current ArcGIS desktop deployments currently pointing to an on-prem license server? I think that license server will just expire. The software gives you the option to log in anyway, and when it can't find its license server, then it will just be logging in will actually do it. I will double check on that one. Benny can make a note of that question that we will go and triple check. But I think the facility to log in and license has always been there. I assume that when you remove the actual Flex license server from the background, it'll default to named user anyway, but I'll double check because I'm not 100% sure. Don't know if Damien knows.
yeah, there's a lot of conversations going on around this currently, so it'd be worth getting our ducks aligned and getting the right message out.
Perfect. Right, Benny, mark that one. How to adhere to correct naming convention for SSO site? What is the correct? Well, so there's two things in there. I'll take the second one, the short name functionality. So the short name functionality is the URL prefix up there. So on mine, it's Esri UK Education. It might be ucd.maps.arcgis. It might be uocambridge.maps.arcgis. You need to know that to get into the front door of your SSO. But for your SSO, I hate this. I can never quite get back to the correct tab without doing that. To get to the SSO it's within your SAML configuration, isn't it? That your name, the name of the ArcGIS Online user, Damien. That's how do you configure that?
Oh, that's configured. So if you go to this really specific, but if you go to the Microsoft tutorial and go to step 5, it basically tells you what that SAML configuration is, what your identifier, your entity ID should be. So it'll be your whatever your arcgisonline.maps.arcgis.com is. So it's all very specifically within that Microsoft workflow.
No,
Aidan, I've unmuted you so you can speak.
Adi, thank you very much, and it's a very good session so far. I appreciate that. I probably I miswrote that because it said there's only a limited amount of letters you could write in it, so that swung me a small bit. What I mean is the actual name of the site. So like we've trinitycollege.maps. So I'm coming from the fact that our college name is Trinity College Dublin, and all that. So obviously only someone from Trinity College Dublin can request a site called Trinity College Dublin. Nobody outside Trinity can request that site, and so on.
So I think what you mean is if you've got your short name in your
Yeah.
non-SSO, how can you get the same short name in your SSO when you've got a new organization which is EU hosted? The answer is you can do it, but it's a faff. And the normal process would be that you wait for the old one to expire, and 30 days after, the name goes back into the central repository, theoretically. But there should be a way, and I am investigating this for another customer. Can we shortcut it?
I don't think it's from our angle, because relevant in the sense that our new site will be a completely different name, because I suppose we named it incorrectly from the start. Trinity College, we'll probably name the new site Trinity College Dublin, so the short name shouldn't really come into effect. Am I right?
Shouldn't, but I think you've raised a really good question for other people on the call. If you want to keep that short name the same, then let us know, and it will remind me that I need to chase that through with Esri Inc. Because the normal process is just, it's not designed with this use case in mind, but there must be a way for us to say, okay, let's change the old one to Trinity College 2, and then request that that URL is instantly freed up so as we can apply it to the new one. And then we're going forward with the new front door, because actually you only really need that short name to get to the front door. It used to be baked into lots of our applications, like story maps used to be shortname.storymaps.arcgis, and now it is an alphanumeric string, and experience builder is the same. So that short name is most important to get you to the front door. But good to raise it, and good to remind me that I need to find out if there's a shortcut.
Thank you.
How many authorized colors can we have? Well, I had to go and revise this. Anna's probably got it already, but the answer is, depending on the site license that you have. So a departmental license gets 1, small site license gets 4, a medium site license gets 6, and a large site license gets 10. You can swap them for a period of time until SSO is set up. So if you go, okay, I'm going to take it off Tim temporarily, and I'm going to assign it to Jane because she is doing the SSO. And when Jane has reported that it's working and we're happy, I'm going to then change the authorized color designation back to Tim. Does that make sense? So you do have a finite number, and it is 1 for departmental, 4 for small, 6 for medium, 10 for large, and you can swap them temporarily, up to you. So if you're at capacity, find somebody that's not using it as much, swap it over to the person that needs it, and when they don't need it, swap it back. Should a GIS expert be a better person to understand the process of transferring data from one site to another as opposed to IT admin? Maybe, and it depends. Like there's loads of reasons to transfer data. You might actually have somebody that's left the university and just wants to transfer from one university to another, and I'm going to have documentation to support an individual that migrates. But on the call this morning, we were talking about whether or not it's easier for you to just take responsibility of moving everybody's content over. So you shut down access to your old AGOL for a week in a holiday, and then you transfer the data open and you give everybody access to the new front door. Because the best will in the world, if you let every user do it, some are going to forget and not do it. But whether it's a GIS expert or an IT person, it's up to you. Have a look at the tool when it comes out, do an experiment and see where the responsibility better sits. They're not hard. They're like an old FTP client in some parts. I haven't played with the scripts or the ArcGIS Pro plugin, but Benny and I are going to investigate and we will let you know. And I don't know if Damien's got any experience of other customers doing this migration and how they got on.
Yeah, there's it can be tricky, is all I will say, particularly when it's to do with the migration of content, and the item IDs that are associated with that can be extremely tricky to get right, and it can require quite involved ArcGIS enterprise level administration. So yeah, hopefully we can get automation that can help with this.
Perfect. Pesky item IDs. John's question, is the annual certificate renewal because you're using commercial SSL? How will the upcoming...
Yeah, brilliant question. Yeah, that's, I was looking at this and quickly Googling myself. I can't find anything on it. I will ask the right people though to find out about this, because yeah, it's a really good point, really good question.
Okay, so we'll park that one at the moment and try and get you the right answer.
Yeah.
How does someone become an authorized caller? I've got in that manage portal, we've got that information. I obviously now can't find it, but updating your contacts. Let's open this resource.
You might have to refresh the page ID if it's not loading.
Might have to. But we do have a resource. It's pretty easy. You go into my Esri, you add them as a user if they're not a user. If they are a user, you can just then assign them access instantly. So it's super simple. We tend not to do it. We tend not to now go in and change contacts within my Esri. It's the customer's responsibility to touch that data, and we try and stay out. But it's documented here. So authorized callers, log in, click users, manage authorized callers, add a caller, select the user you want, make them an authorized caller, done. Then that person can raise a support ticket, and it doesn't get bounced back to me when Damien goes, well, they're not an authorized caller. Why are they getting in contact? And you raise that ticket through my Esri as well. And there is another resource in the lecture with Hub, which explains how to do that, how to raise a support call itself. But it's super simple. Go to my Esri, go to support, raise a case. And also, they're really good at coming back to you. They come back to you really quickly and tell you they've got it, and then the support call gets triaged to maybe get the information that they require. And then if it looks super technical, then it goes to Damien's team and they start scratching their head. Could we have a separate AGOL for short courses like summer schools that we can delete everybody when it's over? The answer to that is yes. You get multiple AGOL organizations, and our training team use a script which strips down an AGOL account. It removes all of the users after the end of every training course and then sets it up as if it's new. So the answer is yes, and there is a script that helps you manage the users in that organization. So if you want that, then yes. So whoever Anonymous is, if you want it, just get in contact, highered@esriuk.com, and let me know, and we can sort that out. Getting to the end, Chris suggesting we create new AGOL SSO instances rather than apply SSO to existing instances. Honestly, it's up to you. It might be easier to use your existing one. But if you did ever have concerns about safe harbor and US data, then now is the time to go to an EU hosted node, I think. So there's no point setting, well, it's not no point. You'd be kicking yourself if you went through a big change and then somebody was like, well, we're not using this if we can't do EU hosting node. And you're like, damn it, I should have done it when I had the opportunity. So I'm just saying now is maybe the time to think about that. It's not a clean EU hosted node. It's super complicated. I've got some information on that I'll put into the follow-up. It is wildly complicated, and Damien will probably agree. And every time I think I understand all of the ramifications, there's another one coming in. So yeah, personal details though are the most sensitive thing that people don't want necessarily going to the US. And with SSO, it's usually an alphanumeric anonymized string that would be held in the main user database. And if the user chooses to put in their name, their address, their shoe size, and their telephone number in their profile, you know, that's their responsibility. You don't need to put that in. Our licensing is currently being provisioned to 2026. Is that being withdrawn? If you go into my Esri, most of them now reflect for ArcMap and ArcGIS Desktop, sorry, and also the concurrent and single-use licenses that they will be expiring on the 31st of July 2024. If you're not seeing that, then I think Esri were doing it in chunks, so you may be one of the last chunks, but I would expect to see that change. So yes, should say 2024 at some point. How long does it? Oh, that's moving. Sorry, Benny.
Yeah, I just wanted to answer Gail. Gail, I put in a request in December, and you should have received an email from Esri about activating an organization. If you haven't received that, let me know and I can request it again. But it might have ended up in your spam folder or somewhere.
It usually comes from ArcGIS notifications. So if you can look for ArcGIS notifications in your trash folder, that would be helpful. How do you match up existing user accounts with their SSO identity, Damien? I'm not sure you can.
Not directly, no. It's quite a difficult thing. It's a migration of content across. There probably is something you could do with automation around looking at potentially email addresses or some level of information that's consistent between the two users. But yeah, there's not an easy way to just say, oh, make them an SSO user now.
Yeah, and I think this last question is a repeat of another one. The lecture with GIS manage users page has the information on how to set up an authorized caller and then how to raise a support call. So hopefully that's it, unless people have some additional questions. And we've somehow managed to spin it out to 55 minutes there, Damien. But hopefully the question and answer session was useful. I'm going to swap back.
Adi, there's one more question waiting to be.
Oh, right. Okay.
I just didn't see it in the moderation tab.
So is this
yeah,
Nicholas?
I've approved
if we can't match existing users with SSO identity, how can we migrate the data? So the ArcGIS assistant allows you to do it, but also you could devolve that responsibility to the user. So people might go, well, that's all. Well, I'm going to start afresh. Every time I get a new laptop, I try not to migrate all the crap that I've built up on my old one. Some users will behave in different ways, but they can use the ArcGIS assistant tool. They just need to be able to log into both accounts, and then they can migrate stuff over, or they can just change the owner within ArcGIS Online itself, can't they? You can assign new ownership, so you could transfer it to your new owner, your new account, sorry. So there are ways. We'll cover that off in the migration information, Nicola. All right, sorry, I meant between the old site and the new site. Yeah, that's coming in the migration story map. There's different ways, and Benny and I are going to experiment with the ArcGIS assistant, which is really good at doing raw data and maps. It's not as good at story maps. So these items, these apps, so story maps, experience builders, and dashboards. It's not as good with those, but there's some scripts. And I think that alludes to Damien's point. It's when you've got the item IDs, that's the critical part that has to be correct. but there's a couple of different options. There's the scripts and there's a pro plugin type thing. But yeah, we'll have a look at that, and I'll catch up with Damien about best practice from their side, because they've supported customers to do this before, and then we'll get all the information to you. Damien, anything to add on that one?
No, perfect. Yep.
All right, magic. Well, that's us. I'm going to give you back like 1.5 minutes of the hour, but no, I'm not. I'm going to use it. What's happening next? Well, I'm going to send you an email probably towards the end of this week or the beginning of next. Valerie, I'll come to your question. I'll come right now. Was that a mistake or was it not? Stick your hand up again if you definitely want to speak. If it was just a mistake, I'll carry on. We've got 2 more webinars coming up. First one on the 27th of February. Going to be looking at the advantages for teaching and research of using a modern GIS approach, which is an internet-centric model, using ArcGIS Online as the glue, using apps, dashboards, but also ArcGIS Pro and how it all connects, and what opportunities it gives you to change the way that students learn GIS, or maybe how you actually accelerate research. And then on the 12th of March, we'll have another webinar, which is really focused on how you can use ArcGIS to manage the estate and the facility of the university. You have within the site licenses a dollop of ArcGIS named users to help do that. So it's 10 for small, 20 for a medium, and 100 users for a large institution. And they're underused, and there's some very real things that your estates and facilities teams could push forward on if they actually started doing some really simple GIS. And we're going to do that. So we're going to market that to everybody that's on this call. You might be better placed to connect into that estates and facilities team to get the right person or the interested person on the call. That's what's coming up. And that's us done. So if there are no more questions, I'd like to say thank you very much for attending and staying on through the entire hour. Thank you very much to Damien, who's had to do all of the hard work and take the hard questions. And for everybody else, if you do have questions, fire them in to highered@esriuk.com, or if you're having problems with a technical implementation of SSO, raise a support call through my Esri, and Damien's team are best equipped to support you with that issue. And with that, oh yeah, and thanks to Anna as well. I forgot Anna, but she's put her camera on. Anna, do you want to say something?
Yeah, it was just to say thank you all at Esri for coming and doing that on behalf of all of higher education. That's much appreciated.
No worries. So have a good afternoon. I'm going to go and have lunch before I faint. And I'll see you soon.
Thank you all.
Cheers, everyone.
Bye.